Hello, my name is Dr. Katherine Inge, and I'm here today with Dr. Carolyn Graham to discuss research that we have been doing on using Facebook as a knowledge translation strategy. The study started about a year ago, and I think we have a lot of very interesting and valuable information to add as far as the effectiveness of either Facebook as a strategy or using a business as usual kind of approach to disseminating or translating information on research to individuals with traumatic brain injury. So let's get started, and let me share a little background information on this particular study before Carolyn talks a bit about our findings. Our study actually started with a systematic review of the literature, as well as focus groups with individuals with various disabilities. We conducted 4 focus groups, and each one of those focus groups had between 7 and 10 individuals in them to discuss their knowledge of evidence-based research information, how they wanted to obtain information on that research as far as employment is concerned, and more information about just their interest in going to work as well. The findings led us to some conclusions about how people wanted to receive their information. And one of the first things that we learned is that people with disabilities wanted to learn their information from trusted individuals, such as a VR counselor or another person with a disability or a physician. Those were some of the individuals that they identified as perhaps wanting to learn their evidence-based information from. They also told us that they were beginning to use social media as an outlet to obtaining information. And so what we looked at for this particular study was Facebook as the strategy, as the knowledge translation strategy. In doing that, just for your information, I'm sure that a lot of you who are listening to us today have Facebook and use Facebook on a regular basis. And I thought it would be interesting to quickly look at how many people are actually using Facebook today. And I found this particular reference that says about 1.44 billion active users are using Facebook now. And of that number, about 936 million individuals use it daily, which translates to meaning that about 65% of Facebook's members use the service daily. So that might be interesting information for those of you who would like to know a little bit about social media and access to it. But what does that really mean related to individuals with disabilities? And so I looked around to find us some information about individuals with disabilities using Facebook. And really, I only identified 2 studies related to this, and those 2 study links will be provided to you in our webcast information and resources, so look for these there. There were 2 surveys that I found. One was with individuals with disabilities, all types of disabilities, and what they found in their study was that about 69% of individuals with disabilities viewed Facebook a minimum of once daily, and about 44% logged on up to 40 minutes for each visit. The second study may be more interesting to what we were doing, since we were looking specifically at individuals with traumatic brain injury, and that survey looked specifically at individuals with traumatic brain injury across 4 states through the State Brain Injury Association. And what they found was that almost 60% reported using Facebook regularly as far as the participants in their survey, and therein was 96 individuals. So what this really gives us a background for, as far as our study is concerned, is to see that there is some beginning information that demonstrates individuals with disabilities would like to access Facebook and use Facebook. And so we moved forward with our study. I think one thing that I don't have here on this particular slide that I find very interesting, another reason that we thought Facebook may be a good strategy, particularly for individuals with traumatic brain injury, if any of you belong to a specific group, for instance, or even with your friends, you know that you can turn on the notification feature in Facebook. And so therefore, for individuals with traumatic brain injury who may have difficulty perhaps even remembering that they belong to a group, when they would get an email notification in their inboxes, then perhaps this would be a cue for them to go look and see what had been posted recently in our group. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later as far as the intervention is concerned. So that was one feature of Facebook that we thought would be beneficial, particularly for individuals who have difficulty with memory post-traumatic brain injury. We had 3 specific research questions that guided our research, and those 3 are here on the screen for you to view. First, we were really interested in knowing if a secret Facebook group led by a peer mentor, and if you remember back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago as far as the findings from our focus group, that people said that they would be interested in learning information from a peer mentor. So we actually used a peer mentor within our intervention in Facebook. Is that effective in increasing the knowledge and use of evidence-based research on employment of individuals with traumatic brain injury? And our second research question had to do with the relationship between the participant demographics and the effectiveness of the KT strategy to impact evidence-based employment knowledge and use of the information by individuals with traumatic brain injury. And our third research question really was looking at the qualitative component of the study. What were the employment experiences and issues that Facebook participants discussed within the secret group? So those were the 3 research questions that we addressed within our study. Our study is a multi-method design. It was both quantitative and qualitative research. And we used an experimental pre-post-test control group design. And we also had a post-satisfaction survey specifically for the Facebook participants. As far as data collection is concerned, we did a pre- and post-test of knowledge. We looked at the Facebook post and comments, including number and types of posts, tone of the comments, number of post views, as far as the satisfaction survey that I've already mentioned. I think, again, those of you who are avid Facebook users will realize that a real benefit of using Facebook for us in this research is that it really kept a running history of everything that happened within the intervention that we did within Facebook. So we could see how many people looked at a post, we could see who posted, and all of the comments that were generated around any particular comment. So that is a very interesting feature of Facebook, that I think was really important to our research, and I didn't want to fail to mention that. As you may have already guessed, since I have mentioned the fact that we use Facebook as an intervention, we actually had the Facebook group as an intervention. Those participants were involved in the Facebook group for 3 months, and we posted 5 times a week during the week, Monday through Friday. Now, I will say that if you actually look at the history in our group, we also had activity on the weekend, but we had specifically specified in our protocol that we wanted to make sure that the leaders of the group, and I'll talk a little bit more about the leaders in a minute, posted at least once a day so that there would be information, fresh information that would stimulate or hopefully stimulate participation. Now, the information that was shared on Facebook was sent to the other group as an e-news, and we call that the business as usual group, and they received an email once a month that had sort of like we send out e-news letters for all of our websites. I'm sure that many of you who run organizations send out monthly e-news with new information that you have. And the information that was in that e-news, I would look back over what had been said during the month from Facebook and try to make sure that some of those comments paralleled, the information parallel what was being disseminated in the Facebook group as well. I think that I might have failed to emphasize that our intervention was specifically facilitating information about employment, access to employment, supported employment, vocational rehabilitation. Those were the topics that were focused on in our intervention. The sample population, as I have already mentioned, are individuals with traumatic brain injury. They were brain injury survivors. They had to be at least 18 years of age, and they were their own legal guardian. The participants were recruited from Virginia clubhouses as well as through the Brain Injury Association, the National Brain Injury Association listserv. We developed an online consent process that was built in a database using Cold Fusion as the platform, and the link to that was sent out through the Brain Injury Association listserv with information about the study. The informed consent process basically explained to participants the use of a secret group, Facebook, the fact that they would be randomly assigned to one of the two interventions, that there was no guarantee as to which intervention the person would be assigned to as well, so that we wanted to make all of that clear. We also made clear in the intervention consent process that participants realized that if they were in the Facebook study, that their name would be visible to other participants in the group. And I'll speak more to that in a few minutes when I talk a little bit more about the study and the secret group that we used. But the online consent process started August of 2014, just for your information. Now, no part of the study was implemented until we received IRB approval from Virginia Commonwealth University's IRB as well as CETL's IRB. Once people consented to participate, we used a random number generator to assign them either to the Facebook intervention or to the what we call the e-news business as usual control group. After all of the participants had completed the informed consent and the IRB approval had been received, then we did the pre-assessment of their knowledge. And just for your information, in case you are interested, we actually had 121 individuals consented to participate. And that was from the recruitment process of going to the Virginia clubhouses in person and telling them about the study as well as disseminating it through the listserv. A total of 67 individuals actually completed the pre-test once the link was sent out to them to complete the pre-test. If anybody's interested in the actual database that we use to manage the study, I'd be happy to talk to them individually, but we used a password-protected database that protected the confidentiality of the participants while giving me access to the individual's emails so that I could communicate with them. Carolyn, or Dr. Graham, is going to talk more about the participant demographics in a few minutes, but excuse me, just for your information, as you can see here, the majority of our participants actually self-identified as Caucasian, and a little more, or almost 60% is female, and about 41% is male. And she'll have more about the demographics for us in just a few minutes. I just wanted to quickly say something about the use of our study participants and Facebook, and I find this rather interesting. And remember, these are participants who volunteered to participate, so probably those individuals who already knew something about Facebook. That's not research-based, but my assumption is people who might be interested in using Facebook might more readily volunteer. So if you look at those numbers, about 82% of our sample said that they used Facebook at least once or twice daily. So we had a very high percentage of our respondents that used Facebook daily. Or excuse me, participants, I didn't mean to say respondents. The other question we asked them is, how often do you use Facebook to find information or services and supports about employment? And you'll look there and see that very few of our participants said that they used that to find information on employment, or about 62% said that they never used Facebook to find information on employment. Moving on through here, just of that 67 individuals who actually took the pretest, they were randomly assigned 34 individuals to the Facebook group, 33 to the listserv or e-news group. If you're not familiar with the features of a secret group, when we first designed this study, we discussed allowing people to use pseudonyms. And when we started looking into the process of actually setting up the study, we discovered that Facebook does not allow the use of pseudonyms. Now, if you're sitting there saying to yourself, well, I know plenty of people who have made up their names and used a fictitious name on Facebook, well, that may be true. But in reporting these findings, we wanted to make sure that we were using Facebook in the manner that was intended. So as I have already mentioned, the participants were told that if they were in the secret Facebook group, that other members of the group would be able to see their name. However, within the context of this, there are many protections for secret groups, and one is it's not indexed by Google. If you searched for our group, you could not find it. If I looked on, or someone who was a non-member looked on my news feed, I could see it. Somebody else would not be able to see it or trace it back through my news feed. So there's some very interesting features to the use of secret groups. And I've noticed even in some of the things that I do on Facebook now, more and more of the groups that I belong to are selecting the secret group feature instead of the private group feature. So I'm not going to read any more of what's on the screen there, but I would encourage you to look into the features of a secret group that you can find readily on Facebook if you are interested in replicating any of this particular study. I'll try to shorten this up a little bit because I know you're probably more interested in getting to what Carolyn has to tell us about the findings, but the peer mentor for this particular group was Jay McLaughlin. I've known Jay probably since 1988 when he first came to our supported employment program for individuals with traumatic brain injury, and Jay would tell you that readily himself. And so I've known him for a very long time, and I have watched Jay really over the years. Jay, since that time, has gotten his master's degree. He is now a certified rehabilitation counselor, and he lives compensatory strategies, and his history is so rich with valuable information that can be used by other people with traumatic brain injury, which is why Jay was selected as the leader. And I sort of served as but I did serve as the content mentor, and I worked with Jay. Jay came to my office weekly on Tuesdays, and we used to laugh and call it Tuesday with Jay, where we would sit down and talk about what was going on in the group and sort of process what was going on and design things that would be posted for the week. So I think we've already said that there was a minimum of one posting per day, Monday through Friday. It was employment-focused content, and the e-news reflected what was said within the context of the Facebook group. So now that I've given you a little bit of background, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Carolyn Graham to give us some of the really interesting findings that came out of this study. So Carolyn, let me turn it over to you now.
I'll first begin talking about the types of data analysis we conducted. We first performed descriptive statistics, means, standard deviations, percentages, that type of thing, and then went to paired t-test, where we looked at the pre-post tests for each group, and then independent t-test to look at the differences in post-test between the two groups. And then we moved to a mixed model ANOVA to look at the covariates in the demographics to see if they played a part. And we also conducted qualitative data analysis on the comments on Facebook. We looked at, for the whole study, both the participants and the mentors, but for what I will be presenting today, we will only be looking at the participants' comments. We used content analysis of the Facebook communications, and we did some counting of how many times different people talked and what topics they went into. That is in another workshop that is located at the CETL website if you would like to access it. It was presented in April, and it's easy to find on the CETL website. We coded content for information about the participant, their responses. We looked at whether it was negative, positive, ambivalent, that type of thing, in the situation they were talking about. What topics did they talk about, and what was going on in their communication. And we'll be presenting that today. First, we'll look at the participant demographics. As you can see, there were, for gender and for college, for education, the college degree, there were significant differences between the Facebook and the control group. In that, for gender, there were more males in the Facebook group and more females in the control group. And on the college degree, there were more people in the control group who had a college degree than those who did those in the Facebook group. We did ask them everything from some high school through advanced degrees, but to get to, it just seemed, it worked better to collapse it into just these two categories because they were all over the place. Race, ethnicity was predominantly white in both. There was no significant difference between the groups on race or ethnicity. And on other demographics, again, these were not significant, as you can see too. Age, years since injury, number of jobs before the injury, and then we looked at number of jobs after the injury. And you can see that none of these were significantly different. We'll begin with the first research question. Is social media, specifically a secret Facebook group led by peer mentor, effective in increasing the knowledge of and use of evidence-based research on employment of individuals with TBI? Well, first we looked at the overall. We took both groups together and we looked at the pre and post. And what we found out was, yes, indeed, there was an effect. Both groups, whether it was the control group, the e-news, or the Facebook, there was a significant difference in increase in knowledge from pre to post. And in fact, it was a moderate effect size. Now then we went and looked at each group by themselves. And what we found out is the face group intervention had a moderate change from pre to post, meaning that they gained knowledge. And the news control group also had significant results in which they had gained knowledge from pre to post. Now, the Facebook group had a moderate change, and the news control group had a moderately large change in their knowledge. So what's the takeaway from these slides? Both groups increased their knowledge over time. The amount of change in knowledge was meaningful, it was substantial, and it was useful. So next we compared the post-test of the Facebook to the post-test of the e-news group, and there was no significant difference between them, meaning that the Face group was not more effective than the e-news group. When we looked at the means, you can see that the news group has a little bit larger group. Now, in the conclusion, Dr. Inge will be discussing this a little bit and talking about why we think we saw these differences. Research question 2, what is the relationship between participant demographics and the effectiveness of the KT strategy to impact evidence-based employment knowledge and use by individuals with TBI? Here I used a mixed model ANOVA, and I added covariates to this model. I added number of years since injury, number of jobs before injury, number of jobs after injury, age, educational level, and gender. With all these covariates in them, there was no difference. It was not significant difference between the two groups, and none of the covariates explained any of the variance. I even took out some of the covariates to see if changing the number of covariates or some of the covariates would make a difference, and it didn't make a difference. So the takeaway here is both the e-news and the Facebook interventions were effective. There was no difference in the effectiveness. Now with a larger sample, there might have been a difference, or with the length of the intervention, there might have been a difference. But again, Dr. Inge will be talking about this later in the conclusion. After doing those analyses, I did an item analysis. I wanted to determine what items, if any, were difficult for the participants in both groups to learn. And there were 3 that were learned that they did not change, their knowledge did not change on. And they were knowing all the services included in supported employment and knowing the services to expect after they obtained the job. They didn't know that. And they also didn't know what to do if the VR counselor said that even though they had a severe disability, that they weren't eligible for services. So these 3 things they did not gain knowledge on in either group. So what does this tell us? Well, in educating people with TBI, one needs to overemphasize pre- and post-employment supported employment services that they can expect to receive, and to help them learn the process of what to do if they have a severe disability and they're told they're not eligible for services. During about the middle of the intervention, we wanted to know more about how the Facebook participants were experiencing the intervention. And so we had a short satisfaction survey sent out to them. 35% responded. Now, that's not a very good response rate, but that's typically what you get in survey. So we're satisfied with it, I suppose. It's adequate. We did not give them an incentive. That would have increased our response rate if we had of. But it is what it is. But what we found out is they were pretty generally happy with the Facebook book experience, the secret groups, and that if they would recommend it, 91%, in fact, would recommend the group to others. And some of them even thought that it should be extended. When we talked about when we asked them to write down what they liked best about the Facebook, they said the small groups, They really like Jay's insight and his experiences as being a survivor. And that's actually a picture of Jay with Jay's dogs. And he really did bring his dogs into his discussions with it in the Facebook. And that really helped them a lot. And I imagine Dr. Inge will be talking about that later. They also like the support and openness and knowing that they were not the only person that had a TBI and who were struggling with this. And they really appreciated the learning and the resources that were available on the Facebook page. We also asked them about changes in Facebook. 33% said they did not change anything. There were a few that had recommendations, and these were single response recommendations so that they weren't repeated by another participant who responded. And as you can see, they wanted the group to continue, and they wanted to expand it to brain injury and not just TBI, and they want it to be more visible. Now, there was one person who was concerned about security, and we had a few people who were reluctant to comment, and this may be one of the reasons they were reluctant to comment was about security. Also, they wanted more focus on work. We did talk about some other topics, and you'll see that in just a moment on another slide. And they thought having a topic a week would be a good idea. Research question 3. What were the employment experiences and issues that Facebook participants discussed with a secret group? Now here is a diagram of what the different posts were about. And you can see the number one post was employment. It was 32%. But there were some other topics that were discussed. Skills post, life story, relaxing inspirational post, and joined post. The joined post is when they first joined the group. Each one were welcomed, and there was a lot of welcoming and discussion and trying to build cohesion within the group. And then the relaxing and inspirational, we found out that these folks were many times very stressed out, and sometimes they would just be very negative in their comments at times. And so to help them, Dr. Inge felt like having inspirational and relaxing posts to sort of be uplifting would be helpful to them. Many people and the participants in the Facebook talked about, life stories and what was happening in their life. And then again, not only were we talking about the knowledge about skills, but we also, knowledge about employment and how to get employment, but we also talked about skills. Again, here is another graph that shows you who talked about what. And as you can see, that employment was the number one thing that the participants talked about, and we'd labeled the member here. And then next was a relaxing and inspirational post. And then third was skills. Today, I'm just going to talk about the employment themes. Again, there's a wealth of information on the Facebook. And since the whole intervention was about learning more about employment and gaining employment, that was the most relevant for this presentation. And so we had 6 themes that came out of the data. We had current employment. They talked about their experiences in their current employment. We talked about disclosing when interviewing or trying to seek jobs, and seeking accommodations, employment goals, seeking employment, and past employment. When we were looking at the current employment theme, we found that the participants were concerned about their employment experiences, and they really talked about it in depth and continually throughout the intervention. And the tone of most of the comments were ambivalent or negative. We did have some positive, but overall the majority were ambivalent or negative. And the ambivalent comments concerned the complexity of living with a TBI and working, and being proactive at work, and coping with the challenges one faced at work because of having a TBI. And then the negative comments had to do with a poor fit in the job with the individual and the lack of confidence in completing the task having to do with the job. Now, most of my quotes are very, very large, and so I'm not going to read them all. I think you take the time to read them, and I'm just going to sort of give you a thumbnail sketch of what's going on. Now, Jeff, in this quote, is talking about the complexity of having TBIs. In fact, that there's some needs that people with TBIs need to have that changes the dynamics at work. And because of that, some employers or supervisors are more reluctant to work with people with TBIs. And he really emphasized the complexity that having a TBI creates at work. Sam was trying to be more proactive in the light of changes at his work. There was a change in the chain of supervisors at his work, and he realized that he needed to provide his direct supervisor with more information about his limitations due to his TBI, and that he needed to work on his communication and to really focus on communicating with people he trusted during this change. Erin was dealing with a number of different challenges at her work, and she was working to cope with these challenges. And the way she did it was by reframing her experiences and making them more positive and trying to find the humor in it. In that, she knew that she had this injury, and because she had an injury and was recovering from it, she had a new brain, so to speak. And so that she knew that she had to rest and give her new brain a rest from time to time. And she knew that things just didn't always work out the way she planned. Sometimes she was trying to pour milk into a bowl and it would miss the bowl completely. And so she would label these her Lucy and Ethel experiences. And so she would, again, try to bring humor into it. And she also tried to reframe it into a more positive things that as she progresses, things will get better. Erin also experienced a poor fit in her job. She worked at a retail business, and it was a very busy retail store, and it was loud, and she had a number of different tasks to do. In fact, she was supposed to be multitasking, and that was very difficult for her to do. And she really enjoyed one of her tasks that she did, and her major task was arranging flowers, and she really enjoyed arranging flowers, but it was noisy. And so she really was struggling with working at this place and having a job and working with flowers as she likes to do, but the environment in which she was not conducive for her situation. Now, Ashley lacked confidence. She was really fearful. She had obtained a new job, and she was afraid of making a mistake, in that if she made a mistake, she would get fired. And so she was very, very nervous, and there was pressure because the person who was training her would be leaving soon, and she was afraid that making any mistake may cause her to lose her job. But she was being much more hard on herself than she needed to be in this situation. Tom talked about the positive. He was very positive in his experiences at his current situation. And he talked about being self-aware and of developing coping strategies to deal with the difficulties that happen. And what he has done over the years is he's learned from his mistakes in his past employment situations, and he takes to heart that and tries to learn from those experiences and move forward. The next theme was there's a disclosure theme. Of course, we had questions concerning disclosure. Should we disclose? Should we not disclose? And asking Jay for tips on whether to disclose and how to do that. Then there were positive comments concerning experiences of disclosing their disability, as well as a negative consequence of not disclosing. So here are some of the questions that were asked by the participants about disclosure. Now, Ashley had a very positive comment to make about disclosing. She just had an interview and she was very honest, and she had taken tips that Jay had given her and used those, and she felt very good about herself and felt good about being honest with the people she was interviewing about her situation and her abilities. Drew, on the other hand, had not disclosed his disability and had found out that he was laid off several times due to the fact that he was too slow. It could have been that if he had talked to them about his disability, that maybe that might have been different. We don't know, but he had a negative experience by not disclosing. Seeking accommodations was a third theme, and Molly had a positive experience with accommodations at work. She had asked for the ability to work at home some to help her with cognitive fatigue, and her employer allowed her to stay home and work at home 2 days a week, and that really helped her a lot. Now, Jill experienced resistance to accommodations, and this was more at the university level. She had a professor who was resistant to giving her extended time in taking an exam and in turning in assignments. And so she was working on trying to explain to the professor why she needed the additional time. Tammy also had difficult experiences in receiving accommodations, and what she ended up doing was buying her own keyboard, because the management wouldn't. They did provide some accommodations, but they refused to buy her a keyboard, so she just bought it herself, and so that she could work effectively. The next theme is employment goals. Here, participants were exploring realistic jobs they would like to have, and they were a bit ambivalent to positive about their possible opportunities. Derek had a job, but he had other interests that his job didn't fit. And so he wished he had had a better job and was hoping to be able to find something that fit his interests much better. Jeff aspired to move up in the organization, and so he was going to be interviewing for a position that was a little higher than the position he held at the same organization. He wasn't real positive. He was very anxious about the situation, but he was going to go for it anyway. Jill was one of the participants who had not had her injury as long as the other ones, and so she was still recovering in some ways, and she was really impatient with it. She wanted to move forward. She wanted to get a job and get out there, and she felt like her recovery process was a little bit slower than what she wanted and what her timeline was. The next is seeking employment theme. Here, the participants spoke of strategies in interviews, anxiety and fear they experienced in seeking employment in light of their injuries. Jill in her interviews, and she tried to present herself in the best possible way. And one of the things that her strategies was interviewing in the morning. She felt like she was fresher and was on the ball, so to speak, and her speech was much better in the morning. So she made sure that she scheduled her interviews in the morning. Jolie was disheartened in seeking a job. She had been rejected twice, and she was going up for another interview. And she just felt like the two rejections before was just very difficult for her to handle. Debbie was anxious about looking for a job, and she was doing many things to help prepare herself for seeking a job, but she had not actually gone out and started seeking a job. She was concerned about her education, being in political science, and a number of other things. But here you can see the anxiety that she was experiencing. Past employment theme. Learning from experiences and job stress and quitting were things that we found under past employment. Debbie mentions a very stressful situation at her work, to the point that it was really difficult for her to be there, and she felt like contributed to her having migraines. So what she did was just to quit because the stress was too much for her to handle. Colin spoke of the learning experiences he learned from his. He jumped in with both feet back into the employment arena after his injury, and he found out that he went too fast, that he needed to take smaller steps in working and in doing his job, and that it was okay to make mistakes, and that as long as he learned from those mistakes, that was positive and then move forward, and that through the process, he would keep turning those corners and keep progressing. Now, we're to the study limitations and the conclusion, and so I'm going to let Dr. Inge take over.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that summary about the study findings. I was sitting here listening to you as you presented the findings, because actually that's the first time I've had an opportunity to sit and listen to the findings as you presented them to us today. And I was so intimately involved in this study because I was in the group really pretty much every day for 3 months, and really longer, because when the study was over with, we did not close the group because I felt that we had really established a commitment to these individuals to having a group that was online for them. And so the group actually still is open for the participants. We really probably don't have more than 1 or 2 posts a week now. It's gradually tapered off. And and Jay is no longer posting. He does respond if someone posts something. I just wanted it to have a natural evolution of dissolving, instead of just saying to the group, okay, we're done, the study's over with. So we did, I think, form relationships within the group as the study moved forward. I know it was a very meaningful experience to me. If anyone happens to listen to this webcast who participated in the study, I would like to take this few minutes to thank them for their participation, because I do think that what we found was very important, and very important for future research. None of which of what I just said is on my slide here, but I thought it was important to really comment on some of those things. I think one of the things that I found most frustrating through the study was the negative tone of the participants' posts. And Carolyn has pretty much already mentioned that to us. And the way that I really began to look at that, I would find inspirational quotes online that were related to traumatic brain injury, about having hope for the future. And those were the posts that Carolyn is referring to as inspirational and positive, really because I felt like these people needed sort of some inspiring, motivating things to hang on to. And oftentimes people would respond to those quotes that I would put up and say things like, "Oh, thank you so much. That was great. I needed that today." So that's I know not what we were really intending to post in the study, but if you clearly have a very negative or unhappy outlook, which clearly you have a right to have after a traumatic brain injury, then you're going to have a difficult time moving forward with employment. So I felt like even though it might not have been specifically related to the job at hand, which was discussing means of becoming employed or to move forward in employment, I felt like those posts were also necessary. The other thing that we did within the context of the study is that Jay would often post a picture. Jay's an amateur photographer, and he would often post a picture and referred back or related some way to employment. We thought that we would draw people in with the pictures. And again, people often posted on those posts that Jay made with some of his photographs. And if you think about it, it's a means of occupation in the sense that they're all different kinds of work that we have in our daily lives. Really, some of the study limitations I'm going to touch briefly on, and I think, again, we learned so much in this study, and I'm really actually looking forward to either expanding this particular study in another way. If you think about it, it's pretty exciting that we did see knowledge change, because if you look at the very nature of a traumatic brain injury, individuals with traumatic brain injury, they're slower processing oftentimes. They may have difficulty understanding both written and spoken messages, and all of those other issues that you see, including problems with recent memory, difficulty starting tasks and setting goals to complete them. And actually, the participants talked about many of these issues when they talked about their disability and how those things would interfere with work. What we tried to come back with in relationship to those posts was really talking about things that they could do. What are some compensatory strategies? Jay would mention strategies that he had used. I would mention strategies that I had seen other people with traumatic brain injury use. And if you think about it, really, using individuals with traumatic brain injury, our target audience, it's really kind of exciting that we saw the results that we did based on some of the issues that those individuals may have. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is that supported employment as a strategy, as well as vocational rehabilitation, having access to vocational rehabilitation services, who in turn can fund supported employment services for people with traumatic brain injury. Those services are the very services that these individuals needed to learn information about, because it could clearly help them with all of these issues that they have in relationship to going back to work. So within a 3-month period of time, we're trying to teach people information about vocational rehabilitation, about supported employment, what can you expect from your employment specialist. All of this is a lot of information to really disseminate or give to people through Facebook as a strategy, as well as through the e-news. So I'm really kind of excited that we had the findings that we did. One of the things that's not mentioned here on the slide, but that as I was thinking about this over the past couple of days, I really thought how interesting it might be to take a look at this limitation and how could we really address the issue of people who have these cognitive problems. And really, it boils down to the whole concept of supported employment again, that idea of having an employment specialist who supports you. So, would it be interesting to take a look at this study in another light and actually have individuals paired with their employment specialist to participate in the Facebook group so that the employment specialist could be helping the person actually translate or transfer the knowledge that we're talking about in the Facebook study into their daily lives? Because that was the other thing that I really kind of found frustrating. I just really wanted to reach out to some of these people and go out and help them use some of these ideas that we were talking about, probably because, they didn't really know how to go about doing it. So within a very brief period of time, they're learning about things. And then you've got the memory issue, the whole issue of generalizing from the Facebook group or the e-news group into the actual use of the information. So those are all things that I think we need to think about in the future when we look at designing a future study. One thing that I really wanted to talk about that Carolyn mentioned, she mentioned the one individual who was working at the retail store who said that she was having difficulty. And I remember very vividly that conversation on Facebook where she talked about she wanted to return to retail and she liked to do flower arrangements and the difficulty that she was having. And that was one of the participants who actually had an employment specialist to help her find that job. And I found that very interesting in the sense that she was working in a very busy, and I know I won't say the name of the store, but I've been in that store. I know what it's like. Probably the match for that individual to that environment was a very poor one because her workstation faced the entrance to the door. People were coming in asking her directions in the store. She didn't have compensatory strategies in place to figure out how to direct people to other areas of the store. Those are all things that the employment specialist, and I don't know where this person lived or where or what program was providing her services, but it was almost like I also wanted to reach out again, that idea of pairing the employment specialist with the individual, because the employment specialist was as much in need of knowledge that was helping the individual in her situation as the individual herself. So it really was eye-opening for me as I moved through the study with the participants who were involved. Just to summarize a few more study limitations that I think we had, perhaps our sample size, it's not listed here on this slide, was small, and so maybe if we had a larger sample, we would have been able to have seen more statistical significance in some of the questions that we asked. I've already mentioned the intensity of the intervention. Perhaps if it had been longer, can you teach people to know information and be self-advocates even through a Facebook group or an e-news in that brief a period of time? Our instrumentation, was it sensitive enough to capture changes in knowledge? We only had 10 knowledge questions, so was that sensitive enough to capture changes? We also had questions related to accessing services pre and post participation in the group. Carolyn didn't get into that. I glanced at that information or data earlier today. We really didn't see any change in accessing types of services pre and post. So really it might be related again to the intensity of the intervention as well as the instrumentation that we used. Recruitment came specifically from the Brain Injury Association and the clubhouses in Virginia. If I were to do that again, I think I would change some of the recruitment procedures, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So those procedures may have limited our study in the sense of how interested were those individuals actually in learning information about employment. And really, that speaks to point number 4 on my slide here. How interested really were some of them in employment? There were many of the participants, and I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, that really didn't post very often in the group. And when they posted very little. Again, that might have been related back to their ability to communicate in the written word. And I think we need to look at some of that as we move forward with the study. I did have several of the participants in the Facebook group say that it was difficult for them to really express their opinion in writing. Again, maybe they needed a peer advocate to assist them. Those are all things that we need to think about if we were to replicate this study again. The last limitation would be their willingness to share information, and Carolyn mentioned the whole issue about confidentiality. And even though we, both Jay and I, continually assured the individuals that no one outside of our group really could see what they posted, some people are just more willing to share. And to be honest with you, I'm probably one of those people. I never post any. I have Facebook group. I rarely post pictures. I just don't want people to know what I'm doing. We don't know how much of that willingness to share impacted some of the participants' willingness to share information, and and that may be, a limitation to our particular study. So what would I think about as far as implications for future research? And one of the first, I think, is the recruitment procedures. If I were to do it again, I think we would look at recruiting participants from active vocational rehabilitation caseloads. How familiar were these individuals in actually what the services were that we asked them whether they accessed or not? So it might have been, or may be, very interesting to look at recruiting people who don't just say they want to go find a job or they're interested in employment, but that they have demonstrated some kind of movement towards employment. So I would look more closely at how we recruit the participants for future studies. Again, would we look at recruiting participants through supported employment programs, through programs who have individuals with traumatic brain injury on their caseload? So those are all things I think that we need to look at as far as that piece of, well, we can increase knowledge, but how do we also move forward in really use of that knowledge? So we have some good findings in the sense that, both groups showed a change in knowledge. So how do we move beyond that using these types of strategies? And I think that would be a very interesting thing to look at. The other thing that I would do if I were to change this study is that I would do an initial focus group with the participants in each group and get not necessarily a baseline of where they're at, but really get some information from them about what their interests are. I also think that, Facebook is about connecting with your friends, and we took a group of perfect strangers and put them together in Facebook and expected them to talk to each other. So I wonder if we did, this is just me thinking about it, and Carolyn and I have discussed this at some length. If we conducted initial focus groups and then we had some ongoing communication, ongoing focus groups where we brought people back together, and I don't know what the magical solution to that is. And we did have a national sample, but we have technology now that we can use to people could see each other face to face. Would it be interesting at a midpoint, monthly? I don't know what that answer is, where people could actually establish some kind of rapport with each other, would that facilitate knowledge and transfer of information or transfer of that knowledge into their daily lives? So, so those are just some more things to think about. The other thing, we did use Facebook. We did post some audio. Most of it was written, however. So I think we need to look a little more closely about strategies, more video, more audio, looking at people's learning styles. After the 3-month period where we were still moving forward, we dabbled a little bit with when Jay would come in and talk with me on Tuesdays. We jokingly called it Tuesdays with Jay, and I would interview Jay, and we would post those interviews in the Facebook group, talking about just Jay's experiences with work and recommendations for people who were looking for jobs. And I thought it would be interesting that more people would post responses back to that. That wasn't necessarily the case, but I do think it provided some variety, and we need to really look at varying our strategies within the context of the group. And I think I've really already mentioned that the issue about instrumentation and looking more closely at how we measured these things. I would say that it's been a great experience, and I look forward to hearing about anyone else's experience with using social media and as a knowledge translation strategy. So I would welcome, and I know Carolyn would welcome as well, any information or feedback that you would have for us. If in listening to us you have some ideas that you would like to share as we move forward with this research. And I thank you very much for joining us today.